They told you Judas was the betrayer, the one who sold the Son of God for 30 silver coins. The name alone evokes treachery, darkness, and eternal damnation. But what if that story, the story you've heard since childhood, was never meant to be understood that way? What if Judas was not the villain, but the only one who truly understood Jesus? Hidden for nearly 2,000 years, the Gospel of Judas was buried beneath the sands of Egypt, a forbidden text whispered about among scholars, condemned by the early church, and erased from Christian teaching. When it was finally uncovered, it revealed something so radical, so unsettling, that even today many dare not speak of it openly. It tells of a Jesus who laughs at his disciples for their ignorance, who speaks of hidden realms, divine origins, and cosmic beings that rule the material world. And it tells of Judas, not as a betrayer, but as the one chosen to set Jesus free. But why was this version of truth buried? Who decided which gospel would define salvation, and which would be cast into oblivion? And what deeper knowledge does it conceal about divinity, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself? In this journey, we will descend into the shadowed corridors of early Christian mysticism, a world of Gnostic revelation, forbidden texts, and hidden wisdom that challenges the very foundation of what we think we know about God and betrayal. You will see how this gospel redefines good and evil, and how it unveils a path of inner liberation, one that doesn't rely on blind faith, but on the awakening of divine consciousness within. By the end, you may never look at the story of Judas or your own soul's journey the same way again, because sometimes the greatest betrayal is believing the wrong truth. To understand the Gospel of Judas, we must step back, far beyond the stained glass windows of churches, and into a time when the very idea of Christianity was still being born. The year is around 150 CE. The Roman Empire dominates the world, and within its borders, hundreds of spiritual movements compete for survival. Among them is a mysterious and controversial current of thought known as Gnosticism, from the Greek gnosis, meaning knowledge. But this was not ordinary knowledge. It was not learned through doctrine or ritual. Gnosis meant direct experience of the divine, the awakening of one's true self beyond the illusions of matter. To the Gnostics, salvation wasn't about obedience, it was about remembrance. They believed humanity had fallen asleep, trapped in the physical world by lower powers, spiritual forces they called the Archons, rulers of illusion. In their cosmology, the material world was not created by the true, transcendent God, but by a lesser being, the demiurge, a proud and ignorant creator who mistook himself for the Almighty. The soul, they said, is a fragment of the true divine light, imprisoned in flesh, forced to forget its origins. The task of the awakened one was to break free, to pierce through the veil of deception and return to the pleroma, the realm of divine fullness. Now, within this framework, the Gospel of Judas emerges not as a heretical betrayal, but as a revelation, a map for those who seek liberation through understanding. In this text, Jesus does not scold Judas, he confides in him. He reveals to Judas the secret of the universe, the truth of creation, and the destiny of the immortal soul. The other disciples, he says, worship the wrong God, the God of this world, the demiurge, because they cannot see beyond appearances. Only Judas perceives the truth, though he must bear the burden of humanity's misunderstanding. This message was too dangerous for the early church to preserve. By the 4th century, when the Council of Nicaea sought to unify belief under one doctrine, such teachings were declared heresy. The Gnostics and their sacred texts were hunted, silenced, and erased. Libraries were burned. Scriptures were buried. And what remained was a simplified narrative, one that served authority rather than awakening. Yet fragments of the old wisdom survived, whispers encoded in symbols, art, and secret societies that carried forward the essence of the forbidden truth, that divinity resides within, not above. The Gospel of Judas was one of those whispers. When it was unearthed in Egypt in the 1970s, written in Coptic, preserved in desert darkness, it reignited an ancient fire. Scholars argued, theologians denied, but seekers recognized something deeper, that this was not the story of betrayal, but of initiation, the drama of enlightenment disguised as treachery. Because to awaken, one must first betray the false gods within. The Gospel of Judas begins unlike any other canonical gospel. There are no shepherds, no miracles, no sermons to the masses. Instead, it opens in secrecy, with Jesus laughing at his disciples. They do not understand the divine mystery, he tells Judas. They worship a God they cannot see, a God they think is good, yet who rules over flesh, birth, and death, the endless cycle of illusion. This laughter is not mockery. It is the laughter of one who sees beyond the veil. To the Gnostics, laughter signified gnosis, the joy that arises when one realizes that the material world, with all its suffering, is but a shadow of the true reality. Jesus calls Judas aside. "Step away from the others," he says in the hidden gospel. "You will sacrifice the man that clothes me." Those words, cryptic, unsettling, hold the essence of Gnostic thought. The man that clothes me is not Jesus' divine self, but his flesh, his material form. Judas, by delivering him to death, would not betray him, but liberate him from the prison of matter. Judas becomes not the villain, but the instrument of transcendence. To the outer world, it looks like betrayal. But in the inner mystery, it is sacred duty, a ritual act of separation between the divine and the temporal, the eternal and the mortal. The disciples, according to the text, misunderstand everything. They pray to their God for power and blessing, but Jesus tells them they are worshiping the Archons, the rulers of this world, born from the chaos of the demiurge. He speaks of luminous realms beyond the stars, where the true God, the invisible spirit, dwells in perfect stillness. Only the awakened soul can return there. And here lies the central paradox. The very act seen by humanity as the greatest sin becomes, in this hidden gospel, the key to redemption. It is a reversal so profound it shakes the foundation of religious morality. For centuries, the world was taught to fear Judas, to see him as the embodiment of evil, the proof that betrayal leads only to destruction. Yet the Gospel of Judas whispers something else entirely, that sometimes the path to divine truth requires breaking the chains of conventional belief. Think of it, Judas, acting in full knowledge of what he was doing, accepts the role of the outcast. He embraces the curse of history for the sake of the eternal. He becomes the shadow that makes enlightenment possible. In mystical traditions across time, this archetype repeats. The misunderstood bringer of truth, the fallen one who carries light into darkness. Prometheus stealing fire from the gods. Lucifer, the light-bearer, descending into matter. The serpent of Eden, offering knowledge that breaks blind obedience. In this ancient mirror, Judas stands beside them, not as the betrayer of God, but as the revealer of man's forgotten divinity. Because in the language of the mysteries, to betray is not to destroy, it is to reveal what was hidden. And revelation is the beginning of awakening. To truly grasp the depth of the Gospel of Judas, one must understand the nature of its rebellion, not against Jesus, but against the very framework of spiritual authority that shaped the world thereafter. The Gospel dismantles the idea of a distant, judgmental God demanding obedience and replaces it with something far more dangerous, the call to inner awakening. When Jesus speaks to Judas, he is not speaking to a man of betrayal, but to the one disciple capable of bearing the weight of revelation. In the text, Jesus says, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." Judas alone understands that the divine spark within cannot be bound to flesh forever. To free the divine light, the form must fall away. The crucifixion, then, is not tragedy but transcendence, the final shedding of illusion. This teaching, however, could never be allowed to flourish. The early church sought order, a faith simple enough to unify the masses, strong enough to build empires. But the Gospel of Judas threatened that order. It suggested that salvation does not come from priests, rituals, or institutions, but from the awakening of consciousness within each person. It declared that divinity was not to be worshipped from afar, but realized from within. Imagine how destabilizing that idea was, especially in a world ruled by hierarchy and control. If every human being carried the divine spark, then no earthly power could claim dominion over the soul. No emperor, no bishop, no institution could mediate one's connection to God. And so the Gospel of Judas, like many Gnostic writings, was silenced, not because it lacked truth, but because it offered too much of it. Within its pages, there are visions, Jesus speaking of luminous eons, angelic beings, and the chaos of creation. He describes the human body as a vessel crafted by lower powers, and the soul as a fragment of divine light trapped within it. The journey of the seeker, then, is to awaken from the illusion of matter and return to the source. This is the central motif of Gnostic thought, as above, so below. What is imprisoned in flesh is a reflection of what is forgotten in spirit. Every act of awareness, every moment of self-knowledge, is an act of cosmic remembrance. Judas's act, viewed through this lens, becomes the mirror of our own awakening. Each of us must face the inner betrayal, the moment when we confront the false gods we've served. Fear, guilt, conformity, and the illusion of separateness. To betray these illusions is to free the soul. This is why the Gospel of Judas was so dangerous. It invites each person to step beyond dogma and look inward, to find the divine presence not in heaven, but in the stillness of their own consciousness. And perhaps that is the ultimate irony, that the one labeled as the betrayer might have been the only one who remained true to the divine plan. For if Jesus represents the eternal spirit, and Judas the one who releases it, then their story is not of betrayal but of unity. The dance between light and shadow, form and formlessness, ignorance and revelation. The Gospel of Judas, then, is not simply an alternate gospel. It is a map of spiritual rebellion, the courage to see beyond what has been written, to question what has been sanctified, and to awaken what has been forgotten. Because in the silence between their names, Jesus and Judas, lies the oldest secret of all, that divinity and darkness are not enemies, but mirrors of one another, guiding the soul toward its own resurrection. The teachings of the Gospel of Judas are not meant to be confined to ancient texts or academic debate. They are meant to be lived. For if the core message of this gospel is the liberation of the divine light within, then each of us is called to undertake the same inner journey Judas undertook, to awaken through understanding, to transcend through awareness, and to redeem through self-knowledge. So how does one apply such esoteric wisdom in the modern world, a world still bound by illusion, distraction, and the worship of material gods? The first step is recognition. In Gnostic thought, awakening begins with seeing the prison for what it is. Each day we are surrounded by systems that promise salvation, fame, wealth, power, religion, even ideology. But these are the Archons of our age, invisible rulers feeding on our attention and fear. To see them clearly is to reclaim your light from their grasp. You can begin this process through inner observation. Each time you feel drawn to conflict, greed, or despair, pause and ask, who within me is reacting? The divine spark does not cling or suffer, it simply observes. This awareness, repeated and refined, begins to dissolve the illusion of identification. The second step is inner silence. The Gospel of Judas speaks of luminous realms beyond chaos, and silence is the doorway to those realms. In stillness, the noise of the Archons fades, and what remains is the quiet radiance of being. Practice sitting in silence for a few moments each day, not seeking visions or enlightenment, but simply returning to the awareness that you are. The third step is the sacred betrayal, the conscious release of false beliefs. Just as Judas freed Jesus from the prison of flesh, so too must you free yourself from the prison of conditioning. Betray your fear of divine judgment. Betray the voices that say you are unworthy. Betray the idea that the sacred exists only in temples and not within your own breath. In time, this act of spiritual rebellion becomes an act of divine remembrance. You begin to see, as Judas saw, that liberation is not destruction but revelation, the peeling away of illusions until only truth remains. You can also apply this teaching through a daily ritual of remembrance. At dawn or dusk, when the veil between worlds feels thin, close your eyes and visualize a small flame within your chest, the hidden light of the true God. With each breath, see it expand, illuminating your inner world. Whisper to yourself, I am not the form that clothes me. This simple affirmation echoes the essence of the Gospel of Judas, a declaration of freedom from the illusion of form. And finally, live with radical awareness. See every act, every interaction, as an opportunity to awaken. When you are angry, see the Archon behind the emotion. When you feel love, glimpse the divine spark within another. When you suffer, remember that suffering is not punishment. It is the refining fire that burns away all that is false. This is the practical path of the Gnostic, to live as one awake in a world that sleeps. To walk among shadows, yet remember the light. To betray illusion, yet remain faithful to truth. For as the Gospel of Judas reveals, salvation is not granted, it is realized. The Gospel of Judas is not merely an alternate telling of an ancient story, it is a mirror held up to the soul. It challenges the comfortable boundaries of faith, the inherited beliefs we never thought to question, and it whispers a truth both liberating and unsettling. That divinity was never lost, only forgotten. For centuries, humanity has feared Judas because he represents the part of ourselves we least wish to face. The shadow that dares to question the divine order, the voice that asks, what if everything we were told was wrong? But in the stillness behind that question lies the seed of awakening. Judas's story is the story of all seekers who choose truth over comfort, knowledge over conformity. It is the story of those who walk the razor's edge between devotion and rebellion, those who understand that to awaken is to be misunderstood by the sleeping. He was not damned for betraying the Son of God, he was sanctified for completing the divine mystery, the mystery of release, transcendence, and return. Perhaps this is why Jesus, in the hidden gospel, laughs. He laughs not in cruelty, but in compassion, for those who still believe that God can be confined to a doctrine, a name, or a form. He laughs because he knows that awakening cannot be imprisoned by religion. It must be born within the heart. So, as you leave this exploration, remember, the true gospel has never been written in ink or carved in stone. It is written in consciousness, whispered in intuition, glimpsed in dreams, felt in the silent knowing that you are more than flesh and thought. To follow the path of Judas is not to betray God, but to betray illusion, to surrender the false so that the real may arise. And maybe that is the forbidden truth the world was never ready to hear. That salvation was never about being saved from sin, but about remembering the light we have always carried within. Because the greatest revelation does not come from angels or scriptures. It comes when you dare to look within and realize that you are never separate from the divine at all. If this journey awakens something within you, share your thoughts below. And if you seek more hidden truths buried beneath time and doctrine, subscribe. For the path of wisdom is endless, and every question is another doorway to the light.